This is part two of my podcast interview with Laurence Phillips of Hardy Roach Games as we continue to discuss his games, tabletop RPGs, and I continue to fight the lack of sleep and doing recording at about 7:30 a.m. in the morning. You'll find a link to part one down below. With that, please enjoy the rest of this podcast already in progress. And the other point I want to touch on, I think is very interesting, as you're describing the challenge of consent when it comes
Mm,
to like decisions in games and stuff like that. I think that's another very interesting aspect. And again, it kind of ties in what we're describing with Fear and Hunger. That Fear and Hunger and a lot more challenging games like that are about this idea that the player doesn't have complete control, or that the
yeah,
game just, quote unquote, outright hates you. That,
right.
every dice roll ends up bad. You like this character? No, too bad. They get their head cut off.
Yeah.
Goodbye. They're gone from the game. And there's always that challenge. I think as we're describing about like how people consume media, of not really digesting a media anything, or
Yeah.
if it's doing something that's very provocative or doing something that's very extreme. Like the very, I am not sure what the actual phrase is, but that if the author puts something very disturbing or provocative in a game or in anything, that means they're obviously a supporter of that, and that's not true.
Yeah.
Last year we had the game of horses that kind of
Right.
stirred a lot of controversy, and I
Oh,
played
that
it.
controversy was so stupid.
Yes, I played through the entire game, and it was it was a mature game, of course, but it's not like the moral fabric of our world coming apart because of that game. And I've always been someone who supports like the idea of being able to push the envelope when it comes to games because that's how we can move things forward. And again, like a game like Fear and Hunger or even a game like Look Outside wouldn't have even been thought of 30, 40 years ago because no one would have allowed, games that have like that kind of either depiction or that kind of storytelling.
Mm.
But
Well,
the
it's interesting you should say that because in so one of my first PC games I
Mhm.
ever played, and it's a game that one of my career goals is to find a way to get in touch with whoever owns the rights to this and buy the tabletop RPG rights to this game, is Vanger's One for the Road. Do you know Vanger's?
No.
So you would probably like this game, I think. Rangers is a obscure Russian game that is where you play. God, it's really hard to describe. It's a far, far future, weird alien kind of dimensional travel setting where humanity has essentially long since been sort of manipulated, evolved, changed into this weird race of bizarre alien human hybrid creatures that exist across multiple dimensions. And you drive a car. It's kind of like Mad Max, but if
Mhm.
everyone was a weird alien bug mutant. And it's completely impenetrable. Like it's completely like you'd go and talk to a character and they just throw a load of meaningless proper nouns at you in a weird order that make no sense. And they go and tell you to do a thing. And then like so you spend so like the first world, 'cause it's divided into world. First world, you'll spend ages there grinding up money. You like drive it's like top down, you like drive a car, you do deliveries, you fight other cars and you spend ages, you grind, you get a really good car, you're like, right, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to go, I understand this game, I'm going to go to the next world. So you go to the next world, and your first port call is one of the little bases that are around each map. So you go to the base. The guy there is like, who the fuck are you? You don't have the identification slip that we use to identify people who are allowed to drive proper cars here. We're going to take your car and all your stuff and give you the shittest car in the game. Off you go. And the only way to avoid this fate is to go to a particular base at a particular time of day and dig into a particular spot of the wall and find the like identification collar that someone left there. Or you earn the collar yourself by doing like 1,000 deliveries in the shittest vehicle of the game. Like that's not fair and it's not fun. And I'm kind of a defender of the rights of games to not be fair or fun. And this is the area where game, honestly, just like game design in general, whether TTRPGs or video games, are in friction as an art form with capitalism. You need people to buy your game to continue making games, and to make people buy your game, it needs to be fun. But that limits you because art doesn't have to be fun, and it shouldn't have to be fun. Like it's fine if you don't want to consume art that isn't fun. But it's a philosophical question about like the existence of art, right? And that's always going to be in friction. But the point is, right, is that like this game came out in like the late 90s, mid to late 90s. And like I think that kind of experience was actually more common at
Mm,
that time because games weren't like a film industry level thing yet. And like there was space to just be like, yeah, we just put out this game, and it was a big hit in Russia and nowhere else, but it made enough money to be, have some kind of manufacturing, and translation in other countries. And like the games industry, it's got too unwieldy for its own good. But there's really no way to put this genie back in the bottle, and the the pathways for games to be discovered already exist. It's just they don't exist in a way that funnels them at all into the mainstream,
mm.
which is a difficulty.
Yeah.
Um,
I just found Avengers on Steam. I added to my wish list. Maybe
yeah,
at
it's
some
on
point.
GOG. I reckon they're getting it on GOG because on
Yeah.
GOG it's been given like fixes that make it work
Uh,
properly.
okay. I will
Um,
definitely look into that one. And yeah, like I think that's a really good point about how like the '90s was in particular like a very interesting decade for so many games. Like just kind of like being their own thing. Like there really wasn't like that care or like that thought of how's the game going to do like on a stream or how's it going to do to be
right.
like a mainstream success. As a really good example, like I love the original XCOM. I play the Mega Mods for it. I've played it
Same.
many times. It is not a game you want to play brand new without like any fixes or that open XCOM to go for it. And there
Yeah.
are another one, a Star Control or Star Control 2 is another
Right.
favorite of mine. And like
Yep.
it came from that era of here's the game, go. Like we're not going to give you a
Yep.
tutorial, not going to like hold your hand. And what you said a few minutes ago about how games shouldn't have to be fun to be
Mm.
enjoy. Like I think is a really good like point about that cuts in what we're describing when we're talking about games like Fear and Hunger. When we're talking about games that are trying to do interesting things, people will oftentimes will just say, "Well, is it fun? Is it something that's going to make number go up?" And while there are plenty of games that can do that, again, like I think it's always fascinating to look at games that purposely do something different. And there are
Mm.
people, and I've seen this many times with people who cover games or just play games on YouTube and Twitch, that if the game doesn't fit their mold or what they're looking for, they will just condemn this game left or right. People say, oh, this game is stupid or developers are dumb and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And there's no real thought given as to, again, like why this game was made this way. And that why I think is always where the discussion gets very interesting to discuss.
So I think this is a really interesting topic, and I think it dovetails a lot with the development of video games as a medium and
Mhm.
how criticism of video games as a medium has
Oh,
gone with them. I think in general, in broader kind of media culture, we're living in a we're living in a very corporatified media landscape
mm,
that is very interested in setting objective boundaries and criteria for talking about art. Like, and I think the problem is that so we look at film, right? And film is interesting because it came up in a media environment prior to people just giving like a score out of 10 for something, right?
mm,
And it came up like if you look at a lot of like a lot of film criticism that is really foundationally important academic work came out of like reviews in like the New York Post and the Washington Journal. And there's like just these are just consumer magazines. These aren't academic journals. Just oh, the New York Times did a review of like To Kill a Mockingbird, and it's like a foundational piece of like film criticism, right? And then you compare that to how video games evolved, and video games evolved being seen primarily as consumer products. and as a technical consumer product. So they were evaluated on those grounds. And there's reasons for this that make sense. But I think that is so in the DNA of games criticism that it's like reviews aren't necessarily answering the question of what meaning does this game have? What's its importance in the scope of video games as a genre, as a medium? They're asking the question, should you buy this product? And that's a very difficult question. That's consumer advocacy, and it has a place, but it's a different place. And it's a place that I think video games are only now in the last like 15 years or so breaking out of. And you're getting people who are talking about games in the way that people didn't before. Like things like video essayists and stuff are like, I'm a big fan of like Jacob Geller and like Tim Rogers on YouTube, who are engaged with thinking about video games in the same sort of way that they think about novels and about films and about and stuff, and even directly comparing them. Like Jacob Geller has a really good video where he talks about the cold. It's kind of about that as a concept, and it talks about like the Long Dark and like the works of I can't remember his name now. That author in like the 20s who wrote a lot of like wilderness fiction, and he wrote a short story about a man dying from cold, and then he's like he had like a film and a short story and a game, and he talked about them in the same conversation as part of talking about how humans express this idea and this set of themes, right? And I think that's what I'd love more of that. I think we're not going to get it in the short term anyway, because I think that we're the algorithms are built, the way like everything social media, even things that aren't, and things are built to maximize engagement and algorithmic content. And the problem is it's a regurgitative, cyclical thing. And I think that increasingly you kind of get a lot of media criticisms that's only capable of engaging with things in relative to another thing that they have particular criteria for being objectively good, which I just don't believe in as a thing. There's no such thing as that. And in games, it comes out a lot because games like Pathologic, which obviously a lot of dorks like me like to talk about now. The Pathologic wasn't well reviewed by most places because it's not an intrinsically fun or engaging or understandable experience. But I think it is a meaningful one, and not just because it uses a lot of fancy words and refers to philosophers and stuff, but because it's doing something different, like actively, not just a veneer of kind of. And that's the problem: is people get the veneer, and I'm a big believer in the value of negative experiences, and part of my goals with Giallo, with Il Fantasma del Giallo, is I'm trying to make a game where you play horrible people, because one of the things that I've identified in TTRPGs is even games that are nominally about dark themes and dark settings are kind of fundamentally, often, not always, it does depend how you play them as well, often affirming. Even if your character is kind of like a flawed person, their flaws are kind of put in contrast to their essential humanity. They're usually justified, like not justified, but there's some good reason, right? There's like, and this is not a universal thing, but essentially I wanted to make a game that wasn't affirming. I wanted to make a game where you play a piece of shit that is a piece of shit and doesn't deserve to be forgiven, and think about how they're human. And
Mhm.
sorry, this is, I do interrupt me if this is going too tangential, but I have a big problem with how people when they talk about media use the word humanize, because I've heard it where they've said like, okay, I read a review of the BBC miniseries about Jimmy Savile, who you may have heard of him. He was a major media figure in British television and radio for many, many years. And then it came out that he was a deeply horrible person in ways that I will not go into detail of to save you from getting demonetized.
Mhm.
There was a BBC miniseries about him, and it was very good. It's starring Steve Coogan of Alan Partridge fame. I recommend Alan Partridge. But there was a review for it in The Guardian, and it said that it did a really good job of explaining Savile's life and his personality without humanizing him. Now, I thought that was a wild sentence because he was human. And I'm not saying that because some people might hear that and be like, "Are you defending him?" No, he was human. Like, that's just the truth. He was human. Hitler was human. This darkness is part of the human experience. And I think there's a bit of a problem and I think this is kind of this is sort of a very much a socialist, I would describe this as a bit of liberal philosophy that has come into kind of left wing progressive spaces. This idea of kind of morality, right? Like some people, like, systemic justifications are for some people, and like some people are just bad. And like I think this is counter to this kind of philosophy. I think, and I also think that people think way too much in terms of blame. Like, if you say that people who do bad things are a product of systems, then you're saying that they're not culpable and they don't take the blame, and that's not true. But how this relates to game design is that I want people to be able to engage with characters who are fundamentally bad people, but while still engaging with their fundamental humanity, because I think that's a constructive experience. And it's not a constructive experience in that you need to sympathize with them or agree with them or understand them or forgive them. Just humanize them. That's it. Understand that they're human and that this is within the bounds of human behavior. But and I that I got so far off the topic. I'm sorry to your viewers who are like, how did he get to this? I can't even remember. And you know what? I can't either. This is just the way my brain goes. But to like try and bring it back to something game design relevant, I think this is part and parcel of making interesting art that is maybe not fun, but is interesting.
I mean, like rage games, I think, are a good example of this. The whole rise of stuff like Getting Over It, Baby Steps from last year, and so on.
Mm.
That these are
Yeah.
games that they just like fly in the face of what we would consider to be like a traditional game, or what many people would say would be like a well-designed game. And the reason why they work is that they just like kind of like hit like that very specific emotion of playing something that isn't meant to be a perfect game, and like kind of like forcing it to work. Like if you've watched like people who play these games, like they will rage, they will scream, they'll still play through it again and again to get to that final challenge.
Yeah.
And to go back to what you were saying a few minutes ago, how people kind of like tend to form these very tight knit groups. It's that kind of like problem of, once one game becomes the new hit, then everyone will revolve around that until the next game. Then we have that own little group. That
Right.
it's very hard for developers to kind of like break in or do something differently. Um, as a good point, I just finished wrapping up my last book, or my upcoming book, on kind of cozy and wholesome games, and I
Mm.
talk about the challenge of making a game in that, because you would think on the outside that making a casual game or a cozy game would be very easy, but when we start getting to like these very specific subgenres, and I'm sure you've could have seen this as well with the tabletop side, that people expect certain things,
Yeah.
and if you try to do something differently, you can end up upsetting that audience. Like
Yeah.
with Cozy, for example, like games that have kind of like the almost like a fake horror, fake cozy. It's cozy until then we introduce like the horrible, horrific twist. And if someone plays that game not realizing it's that, they're going to feel like you just absolutely betrayed them as a consumer. That
Mm.
you told me it's going to be this happy game, and now someone's being
Right.
stabbed on screen.
Right.
And it's that kind of problem again of being able to introduce something to someone that's going to be different, but as we're saying, still marking in a way that's going to still, fit the perfect 5 to second GIF, or something like a
Right.
YouTuber can promote in 40 seconds to a minute.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's interesting you bring up kind of cozy, kind of wholesome games, because also we don't necessarily think enough about how a lot of the time these kind of genres, these almost like commercial, literally on like Steam and stuff, commercial tags for
Mm-hmm.
marketing purposes, become codified around philosophical concepts that aren't necessarily interrogated. For instance, the cozy, wholesome genre is bizarrely conservative as a foundational point. Like,
Mm.
and this isn't an intrinsic negative, right? Like, there's like Stardew Valley is a fantastic game, and I played it for many, many, many hours. But it's also what it's doing on like a kind of political level is creating a sort of traditional conservative vision of like community, which has value in certain aspects and doesn't have value in certain others. But the thing is that once a game comes out that does it in this way and it's very popular, all of those aesthetics get thoughtlessly bundled into the genre as a genre signifier, not necessarily as a deliberate choice. And like even Stardew Valley is coupled with this because it's inspired by Harvest Moon, which has similar ideals like put into it. But how many cozy, wholesome games are like you run a small business in a place that isn't a city? Like that's fundamentally like a very specific philosophical vision for like what's cozy and wholesome. And I think it's interesting. There's a lot to read into that. And you could talk about that for a long time. But I think the way that it impacts what we're talking about here is that if someone came out with a cozy, wholesome game that was about, I don't know, being a scrap electronics collector and just being really into like soldering, and you're not selling it, you're not repairing stuff, you don't have customers, you're just collecting stuff for the joy of collecting it, and you're putting stuff together for the joy of putting it together. I'm sure that game could exist, but would it necessarily have the instant genre hook that would get it an
Mm.
audience where instead of, let's say, electronics repair simulator or electronics repair tycoon, where you run an electronics repair shop and you get orders coming in, you have to fulfill the orders and stuff like that. So like it's the way that, like, again, the friction of needing to make like a marketable product that is what people expect, and people are increasingly form their tastes around as the mainstream sources of deeper constructive criticism are dying or dead. This is how people engage. So it's like it's harder than ever to make stuff that, like, what you end up having to do is find something in it or add something to it that satisfies that core, and then kind of trick them into doing something that they didn't necessarily think they wanted, right? Which is actually part of why when I was in the early stages of marketing, um, Il Fantasma Del Giallo, I leaned a lot harder on like the giallo genre aspects of it, and I shifted away from that for two reasons. One is that I just didn't want it to be too specific to the giallo genre, but a big reason was because people don't know what that is, right? But people do know like what neo noir is. People do know what narrativist fiction is. People do know who David Lynch is. If I mention that it's inspired by David Lynch, which it is, but I wasn't mentioning that because I didn't think it was necessary. I didn't want to. But now I do because people are like, "Oh, I love David Lynch," right? So, and I don't take that as an insult. I saw a weird discourse on Blue Sky recently where someone was like, "If you tell an artist that their work reminds you of this other artist that they might never have heard of, it's an insult. Don't do that." That's, to me, that's nonsense. To me, it just makes me think. It makes me appreciative that they're thinking about me in terms of like creative legacy. Like, even if I haven't heard of this person, it may be that their work inspired mine by the chain of connection. Like, they inspired someone who inspired someone who inspired me. Because no one, I'm sorry, if you want to think that your art is like 100% unique and perfect and pure and can never be compared to anyone else, I think you're naive, because there's no such thing as original art. But there's also, and that's not the same as, you get pro AI people who are like, well, if there's no such thing as original art, then AI generated art. No, because for me, what makes art is someone had an intent, and they don't need to have created, like, if someone put a banana peel in a modern art gallery, that's art because they're looking to create a result. They put intent into creating an emotional reaction. For me, that's all that it matters. Um, so yeah, but yeah, long time aside, I think I don't think there's like a way, like ultimately this is just the world that you have to work with. And what I think the best people in the TTRPG space is they kind of do a really good job of kind of getting people in with something that they understand, and then now you have an audience, and now you have people who will follow you into weirder spaces, right? And I'm kind of doing it the wrong way around because I've got several game ideas that are much more let's say mass appealing and easier to market, but I didn't want to do those first because they're not as exciting to me. I'm doing the weird thing first. But hopefully, I can build an audience that trusts me to create something interesting. Like I've worked with Rowan Rook and Deckard before. I think their game Spire was like their big. They had a Goblin Quest before that was a success, but I think Spire was really impressive because it was like, okay, yeah, this world's got elves. This world's got dark elves and high elves and humans and hyena men and stuff. But it's a completely so it's there's some tropes there that are recognizable for people who are into D&D, but it's doing something very different. It's like high elves are like an oppressive overclass, dark elves are an oppressed underclass, and it's like an anti-authoritarian, anti-fascist kind of rebellion story. And then they were able to do Heart, which is similarly it's a dungeon crawler. We all know dungeon crawlers, but it's building in all these super weird little things. So I think that's the way you've got to do it now, really, if you're sensible, not like me. You've got to find the core that people are gonna jump on and then get weird.
And to your point about how to describe these games, again, I think the roguelike genres, I think, a good example of this, with how so many games are used either like Hades or the Binding of Isaac or even something like a Spelunky in terms of their marketing. And it is, I know there are a lot of roguelike purists who don't like that roguelike now means more like the action side. And it's always that kind of push and pull in terms of how you're presenting these games. But so many titles, like when we talk about with platformers, that you say the word platformer to someone, you can mean 20 different aspects of it, from a Celeste to a Mario to again, it's almost 8 o'clock in the morning, so my mind is starting to go blank on this. But if you don't present this stuff to the player, or don't present it correctly to the market, people aren't going to find this game. They're not going to know how to describe it. And it's that, again, as we're describing games that kind of break the rules or do something differently. It's that problem of how do you break the rules enough to make something unique, but you still have to, show to someone and get them excited.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult, right? And I don't want to make it sound like making populist art that is appealing to a lot of people is bad. It's not, and you can do a lot of constructive and interesting things by doing that. But it's not what everyone wants to do, and really, it just fundamentally comes down to that friction of humans are social animals. We like thinking about things in terms of labels and in groups and out groups, and we'll do that with games as well. Like this is in my game in group, this is in my game out group. So it is kind of just a question of just kind of tricking people into new experiences if they're not adventurous. And I can't tell someone, who's, I don't know, working like a hideous 12-hour a day job making minimum wage, that when they get home they shouldn't play like, I don't know, like Call of Duty, Modern Warfare. They should play like this weird Russian game where the game kills you and then tells you you're a stupid asshole. Like I can't tell someone that to do that. But I can't stop myself from wanting to make weird stuff. So it's I remember reading a quote from someone, I can't remember who, from like a famous writer, and it was someone who's like, you're you're not really, it's something like you're a writer if you can't possibly do anything else. Like you don't necessarily even have to like it. You just can't, you just have to do it. And I think also what comes with that is you're like an artsy fartsy, writer. It's you just really struggle to just like there's nothing wrong with making vanilla ice cream. Vanilla ice cream is great. But like if you've either got the urge to do that or you've got the urge to make fucking um you know uh ham ice cream or whatever, right? Like whoever invented savory ice creams, right? And I'm sure, I've never had one. It didn't appeal to me. There you go. Like I try it because I'm relatively adventurous, but something's not a thing until it's a thing. The problem is you can't control when it becomes a thing, and you can't control what happens to it after it's a thing. And you also can't change how people engage and think about art on like a systemic level by making interesting art. Like it's why I say there's, I'm very much a believer of the idea that there's no such thing as revolutionary art in the art can't make a revolution. It can inspire thoughts that are revolutionary, but you know, it's what can I say? It's a difficult sphere to exist in as an artist, particularly an artist who is, let's say, somewhat hostile to commercial market dynamics.
As a time check, as I said, it is about 8 in the morning. I am starting to
Mm.
feel it myself in terms of the time, so I
Yes,
think
I
we'll
think we've
go.
gone a bit over time. I apologize.
That's all right. I think we'll wrap things. Again, I could spend with sleep permitted hours on about like the idea of game criticism and the challenge of it.
Mm-hmm.
But to kind of wrap things up for our conversation, if you're free in the future, Lawrence, I'd love to have you back on. We can certainly talk a lot more about kind of the
Yeah, it's
journalistic
been a
side
lot
of
of fun.
things. But
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
for your upcoming game, so
Mm.
right now I know you are preparing a Kickstarter for it.
Yep,
For people
correct.
interested, do you have an idea or rough time for when the Kickstarter will go up?
I have an exact time, exact day when the Kickstarter will go live. It goes live on June 24th, which is about 5 weeks from now. It's been in the offing for a while. It was going to launch a couple of months earlier, but a lot of things happened. I got married. I went on honeymoon. I got embroiled in an endless roof repair thing.
Ooh.
I'm moving house. So a lot of stuff's been going on. But yeah, so it's launching on June 24th. Um, we'll be offering a physical rulebook, as well as a digital rulebook, and a number of extras, including a full original soundtrack by my good friend and fellow game developer Ed Sibley, who might be interested in talking to actually because he's making a very cool game that is all about making synth setups because he is a synth composer. So it's all about doing things like plugging. And I have to go and look up what it's called again because I'm bad. My memory is awful. Um, but yes, so it's all about plugging things like clapping monkeys and singing gnomes into synth setups and making weird songs with them. And he's doing a complete original soundtrack that's heavily inspired by Giallo soundtracks of the 60s and 70s. And there'll be a couple of sample tracks going up on the Kickstarter. And I'm also doing a range of STL files for miniatures and busts that you can print yourself and play. There'll be no physical rewards other than the book, because this is my first solo Kickstarter. We're keeping it simple. Everything else is digital. All of the art, also all of the design, all of the writing, all of the layout, all of the art is me. So I'm quite overworked, as you can imagine. But it also means I have a lot of creative control over the vision, and it lets me offer things like STL files very easily because it's all part of my workflow. So yeah, it will be about a 200-page rulebook, royal size. So it's like, I can't remember the exact dimensions, but it's like, I think it's a fairly standard US paperback kind of size. Um, and yeah, it will give you all the rules you need for telling these kind of neo-noir metatextual reality bending stories about people with dark pasts and discovering. And it's very zero prep. You don't have to plan out a big mystery. The mystery is unfolded as you play organically. And playtesting carries on, and it's going so well. This is by far, I'm not just saying, this is by far the smoothest playtesting process I've ever had. It's been going supremely well right from the off, and I'm really excited to show it to you. So please do go and check it out. I'm sure if you'd be kind enough to drop a link to the pre-launch page, please do follow it. That's really important, and share it around to people who might be interested in it. And do what we've said here. Take a chance. You may have never heard of Giallo. You may have never played games like this. Give it a go. You never know.
Mm-hmm. Great point to end on. I guess before we wrap up, anything else regarding the game you want to?
I just realized my good friend Ed Sibley's game is called Offbeat.
Okay.
There you go.
All right.
Carry on.
So before we wrap up, anything else you want to talk about in terms of the game design, about Tabletop? Any final point to take us out?
Well, I mean, I think it's very unkind on yourself to give me the opening to go off on a long tangent. So I will not, in kindness to you and your poor sleep-deprived brain, I will not go off on a long thing. But all I'll do is one thought, and I'll sum it up as briefly. Narrative and game design, when your medium is games, are the same thing. That's it. So I think that's a great way to think about games and how to analyze games. Is every system is a storytelling system, even in Vampire Survivors.
All right. Well, again, I am starting to feel it. So before I fall asleep at the keyboard, we will wrap things up. But Laurence, again, it has been a pleasure hanging out with you. Best of luck with the Kickstarter. And hopefully, do you have anything else like planned that you may be working on in the future?
Oh gosh, well, I don't want to talk too much about things that I'm definitely putting out of my mind to work on later, but as kind of little projects on the side to work on, to give my brain a rest, because that's what I do in my spare time sometimes. I'm working on a Blood Bowl style game based around cricket, and I'm planning a line of models for that. And I've got a couple of other RPG ideas that you may see from me in the future when Il Fantasma is all done with, including a game about making Muppet movies, and a game about being 2000 AD style, a 2000 AD style kind of comedic grimdark game about what if the miners' strikes in the UK never ended, and a load of miners and queers and socialists lived in the coal mines and fought bobbies, futuristic bobbies, as in police. But those two projects are definitely years away. This is at least the next 18 months of my life are going to be Il Fantasma, but there will be other stuff that I'll be working on the side.
All right. So, if people are interested in following anything social media wise, you want to mention or promote?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm on Hardy Roach Games, which currently hasn't been updated in a while, but it will get the quick start rules for Il Fantasma when they're ready to launch, which will probably be around when the Kickstarter launches. Hopefully sooner, we'll see. And you can follow me on Blue Sky at Hardy Roach Games. I technically have an X, but I'm not going to plug it because I don't use it, and I hate Elon Musk. And yeah, I mean that's mostly it. There's a YouTube channel which will have a recorded actual play that I recorded with a whole bunch of interesting game dev people, including Chantal Ryan, who's been working on the game Dark Web Streamer, Martin Ratasep, who worked on Disco Elysium and Pentiment, and Eddie Webb, who worked on various tabletop and video games, including worked on Transformers stuff and his own game Pugmire, and Chantal Ryan's partner in crime in business, Ryan, as well. So cool cast of people. That's going to be edited and posted probably close to the Kickstarter launch as well.
All right. So with that, we will say good night, or for me, it's going to be good morning. So I will be getting some sleep. Laurence will get his day started. But
good afternoon for me.
But again, thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, like I said, if you're free in the future, we can certainly have a follow-up chat.
Yeah, absolutely. This was great fun. I'd be happy to chat again. And as you can probably tell, I'm a talker. I can talk for a while, so you won't have to struggle with dead air if you have me back, for as good as for good or ill.
All right. So for the people watching, I am going to go get some sleep. But as always, do the YouTubing stuff. Check out the Discord, Patreon, buy all the many copies of my books. Be sure to check out the Kickstarter for Laurence's game. You'll find a link to that one down below. I'm still not going to try and butcher that with lack of sleep and with a
Come on,
bad
have a go.
tongue.
Have a go.
So,
Have a go. One go.
all right. Let me see here. Pull this back up here so I have it right in front of me. There you go. Il Fantasma Del Giallo.
Not bad. Not bad.
Again, I'll chalk up to lack of sleep to help here. But again, thank you everybody for tuning in. As I said at the start, if you are working on a game or want to come on Chat Game Dem, I'm always looking for guests for our podcasts. So with that, come back for the discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where you examine the art and science of games. Have a great rest of your day, and talk to everyone next time.